What is up, everybody? It's Patrick Steffens from Avis & Young back with another edition of the CoreNet New York Big Apples CoRe podcast. With us today is Gabe Marans from Savills, tenant-rep, exclusive broker with a focus on developing real estate strategy for occupiers. He's worked with companies all over the country on site selection, labor analytics, portfolio optimization, and lease negotiation, both traditional long-term leases and short-term flex, newer to the buzzword stuff. Over the course of his career, Gabe has completed over 6 million square feet of transactions for some of the biggest names in industry. He's very well known in the commercial real estate sphere here in New York, having been named REBNY, the Real Estate Board of New York's most promising commercial salesperson in 2015. That recognizes both current and potential professional achievement. He's known as a high morals and very well ethics guy. He's a friend of mine. I'm happy to be here today. Gabe, welcome, buddy.
Thank you. It's always awkward to hear your own eulogy, so thanks for reading that to me.
Well, let's hope you're not dead yet, pal.
I hope so.
So what we really want to get into today, being this is a CoreNet New York real estate focused sphere and podcast, where that's where most of our audience either is New York based, real estate based, or both. Want to just get into a little bit of your career, where you started, how you got here, what's next for you, and tell some good stories along the way.
That sounds like fun. We're gonna have a little bit of fun here together. I like to say my career in many ways is very one-dimensional. I never set out to be in commercial real estate. In fact, I set out to not touch real estate, and I ended up in real estate by virtue of some bad luck. When I was graduating, where I was supposed to go to school. Where I was supposed to go work. I had a job lined up at Bear Stearns, and that didn't end up happening, and I ended up interning at Studley, which is now Savills, and that was summer of 2008. So one place my whole career. Last time I interviewed, I was in college.
Makes sense. Bear Stearns in 2008. Yeah, makes sense why it was bad luck for you.
It was an amazing time to enter the business. Now, I couldn't have planned for it, but first of all, when you enter into a commission-based business, it's good not to have any other options, which is what happened in the labor market in 08, 09, and 2010. And so it kind of forced me to stick with it. And because of the restructuring within the industry during that period, really deep relationships were formed with people in the business, with clients, and it gave me a chance to learn from the language of cost reduction and cost savings as opposed to grow, which is more of what we've seen over the last decade. So it was a fantastic foundational start to my career. So
you mean completely opposite from the time when I started my career in 15, 16, when it was boom, 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 grow, let's go out and acquire more and gobble up as much space as we can, and the heydays of the WeWork expansion, et cetera, et cetera. Can you touch on a little bit about what was it like as an early career broker in those days when it was an opportunity to learn about cost reduction and savings and stuff like that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge that I entered the business during a period of what I call the democratization of data, right? So people, both brokers as well as our clients on the outside, landlord and tenant, they have closer access to information, and so it doesn't sound that significant, but just the fact that you came in the business with a CoStar mobile app versus when I started in the business fundamentally changed how we thought about the market, how we studied the market. And it sounds old, but I grew up hearing stories of how brokers who were before my time used to tour space with quarters in their pocket to call on payphones to let people know they were coming, and I thought that was antiquated. And then I was telling some of the new hires about how we used to have notes in our pocket on maps, and they couldn't believe it. I think that in many ways the industry is constantly going through some fundamental shifts, but it's all about really how you and what you do with that information, what you do with that data, how you make recommendations to your clients. It's about trying to cut through the noise, which is really how I see the best professionals in our career. They're the ones who are able to take all of this noise and reduce complex concepts into a very simple nugget.
Yeah, you think about the way the residential brokerage world is maybe a step ahead of us in the commercial brokerage with the availability and commonplace of data and listings, and people can only see what they find out in the news and read in the papers or whatever. Where we're at is that shift, that fundamental shift where that information is readily available, but there's so much of it, and so much of it is not applicable to each and every individual tenant because not everybody occupies 1 million square feet.
I mean, we're in a 450, 500 million square foot market, right? I mean, that's a massive market. San Francisco's entire market is under 100 million square feet. And so, as a point of reference, and so when we think about that, we think about how there really has been this flight to quality within the general New York real estate world. And that's kind of dictating the way everybody thinks about space. You have to be proactive in terms of how you view the future in the business, and you have to make decisions today, both on the tenant side and the landlord side, that position you for what's going on 10 years down the road. You know, I don't know if you were going here with this conversation, but you know, I think it's when we think about New York City's office market, I think the most important number is 30 million square feet. 30 million square feet of new development that has delivered to the market over the last 15 years or so. And so we've gone from a large market to an even larger market, and at the same time, leasing velocity has slowed. And so where are those tenants going? It seems very clear right now that they're going to the nicer product. And leasing is happening, which is a surprise, I think, to a lot of people on the sidelines.
Yeah, you read in the paper, people aren't coming back to work. Castle studies were only 47% of daily foot traffic. Those guys who are doing those studies aren't online with me for lunch or taking the trains with us in the mornings. New York's back?
New York is back. I'd argue that other than some very few weird weeks in early 2020, New York never went anywhere. And, you know, I also think it's important to acknowledge that it is different now. We are in a new normal. And I think that we need to reframe how we think about office space also. For some reason, it's the only real estate asset class that's graded by occupancy. You know, if you think about restaurants, no one values restaurants by occupancy. No one values residential by how many hours you spend in the house. So why are we doing that with office space? It's not the function of office space is to be occupied. The function of office space is to serve a greater good. And so all this obsession around this castle back to office and occupancy is totally missing the point. They're using a old, somewhat irrelevant data point to describe what was, as opposed to acknowledging that we are in this new world and we need to come up with different ways of measuring it.
Wow, I really like that. I'm going to put that one in my pocket on prospecting calls.
Take it for yourself, yeah.
So, you know, as we're getting into this R word, dun dun dun, upcoming recession, are there any sort of fears of recession or inflation coming in your day-to-day business today that are starting to impact deal making currently in end of 2022?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is yes, and I'm pretty sure it's going to accelerate in terms of it being a relevant data point. So, are we in a recession? Are we not? Will we be? I don't know. This week, Goldman said within the next 12 months, near 100% certainty that we'll be in a recession. But it doesn't matter in many ways for New York because New York has always been a city of extremes. You know, when something happens in the world, we react either in one extreme or the other. COVID hit, we shut down. Post 9/11, we roared back. Post 2010, 2011, we roared back. We've already recovered all the office using jobs that we lost during the pandemic. So I think New York is going to exist in a bit of a different world because of just the functions of the geography and the density in this New York metro area. But how will it really play a role in things? I think it's going to be mostly focused in construction. So you're going to see inflationary costs get passed through on the construction side of things. You're certainly going to see it on the furniture and at the FF&E front. Even for products that are advertised as made in America, often there are components that are used from overseas. So container costs have come down by like 80%, but it's still reliant on the global supply chain. And so when you are negotiating a turnkey solution with a landlord, it's really important to think about what scenarios there are if costs continue to rise like they have. And compared to pre-pandemic, we're at, depending on the metric, between 20 and 50% higher costs. It's quite significant, and it's impacting how tenants and landlords value and evaluate deals.
Construction costs, furniture, supply chain, from a tenant perspective, because again, that's where you're coming from, and you spend almost exclusively your time, right? You have a couple disposition opportunities. We'll touch on that later. But from a tenant perspective, with these changes coming and these longer lead times and these more expensive construction projects, what do you can you broad stroke what that means for the run-of-the-mill? None of our clients are run-of-the-mill, caveat, 10,000 square foot office lease?
Yeah, I think you have to build in more time to make decisions. Right now, we're in Q4 of 22, and you're seeing larger tenants make decisions earlier. If you were a 100,000 foot tenant pre-pandemic, maybe you got started 18, 24 months in advance. That's now 36 months in advance. And it does apply to smaller companies too. And it's difficult to navigate because you do have this fork in the road, the way a lot of these projects start to evolve, is they start by looking at direct space and construction, and then they might be turned off by the cost to construct. And they've gotten started early because you have to build in time to actually construct the space. And so if you're 10,000 feet, let's say you got started 14 to 18 months ahead of time. But then you realize that it's going to be too expensive to build, and so you say, well, let's look at sublease space. Well, sublease space is great. You find some options, but the sublease wants to get started today because they're losing money. It's valued differently, and so you're not ready yet to move because you got started 12 months earlier. And so I think part of that dynamic, and then flex space even more so, where you're trying to commit to a month or two out, and so you have completely different timelines depending on the type of product you're looking at, and most tenants are looking cross-product, which makes the importance of starting with more time even more important because it can go in one of those three directions.
And we always say time equals leverage. The more time you have as you're making these decisions, the smarter decisions you can make because you can negotiate and put yourself in the right position to achieve the goal, right? Now, with this timing, with these cost concerns, have there been some recent conversations with clients who are still trying to, downsize or resize, or a lot of the topics we were talking about in the last year and a half, something like that?
Yeah, so this gets into tricky territory, right? Because the people who are of the fanatical remote camp don't like when we talk about the importance of the office and some trends in the office and the fact that office space per employee is actually going to rise. It will grow. It is growing. We're seeing it today. On the other side of things, the fanatical 100% in the office refuses to acknowledge that there are changes fundamentally to the workforce. And so what you have to understand is that if you take your average employee who's going to come into the office 2 to 3 days a week, they're coming into the office to do some heads down work, right? Some concentration work. They're coming into the office to collaborate in person with their team. That's why they're there in the office at the same time. But they're also taking time for Zooms with their rest of the team, with distributed people within the company, both in and out, I guess. And so they need space both for themselves personally, but also for a significant part of the day, they need space with a door that closes for them to Zoom. That increases the square footage per employee. On top of that, if you're going to encourage people to come to the office, you want to spend more on the office. So either a nicer office or nicer finishes or nicer furniture. And so the square footage per employee will rise. I think the investment in the office space, all things considered, will rise, but the square footage total may very well come down because you might have significant segments of the population, the employee population, that decides to be remote first, and then they're not being accounted for in the square footage.
So with those changes, with those upgrades, the flight to quality, if you will, are you seeing anything with your tenants reducing or jumping down from class A to B, or is it more of that A to trophy, B to A, C to B upgrade type of thing with their quality of their building?
There's very little downgrading. a company has to justify to their employees in this environment why they should be coming back to the office. It's no longer a one-way street. I wouldn't say it's an even two-way street either, but there does seem to be a bit of inducement that has to happen for employees to come back to the office beyond just giving them free lunch. And so, to downgrade a building experience is something that will be very difficult. It's hard to take things away from employees. So you're seeing a lot of jumps, you're seeing a lot of renewals, you're seeing a lot of restructures, and you are seeing quite a number of steps up. But generally speaking, you will not see a jump down.
And part of that is a lot of those fringe B buildings are upgrading. I know, and it's those A buildings or fringe A buildings are trying to upgrade to get to their next level. So there's things that are sort of unique that you're seeing New York landlords do to make their buildings more attractive to today's tenants?
I struggle with this question about what's an A versus B versus C building because, to your exact point, you've seen a lot of landlords who have seen the writing on the wall, who understand that you cannot compete if you're a commodity building. And so you have to differentiate, and there are different ways of differentiating, and you want to avoid the differentiation of the lowest cost option. And so if you want to avoid differentiating and standing out as the lowest cost option, then you have to renovate the building. And a lot of that comes down to amenities. None of these are a surprise, but most tenants think they want outdoor space, but it's mostly unused. The most important amenity is a conferencing facility. It allows companies in this environment to flex up and down, even more so if you have a flex operator in the building that also maybe allows them to flex up and down. Food and beverage, really key. You don't necessarily need to have a fully built out lounge, but having accessible food and beverage is another key component to it. And then, frankly, creative deal structuring. And so, we're negotiating a lease where the tenant was under 10% of the building, and it was really important to this tenant to get signage. And I think in a different environment, maybe there would have been less of there would be more hesitancy to grant that right to a tenant that is of a particular size. But in this environment, you do have to weigh the needs of different tenants, and sometimes that comes down to creative deal structuring.
That's a great point. I mean, I don't think you would see somebody with less than 10% of a building a couple years ago even be considered for a sign. A lot of landlords reserve that right for, like, it's my building. If you want your sign in my building, it could be in your space. But if it's going to be in my building, you have to be a significant portion of my rent roll and my revenue.
That's right. And the smartest landlords are also willing to consider shorter lease terms. They're willing to build the space. Some of them are willing to furnish that space. They're willing to grant expansion options, sometimes contraction options, so that the tenants who have concerns about what does the future hold have certain levers in place so that they can flex up and flex down, within a portfolio.
So as you mentioned, some landlords build, some landlords furnish. We touched on already that construction costs are going up and furniture lead times are going up. Does that mean rents are going up?
At the end of the day, the tenant still pays. So one way or the other, the costs are going to get passed down to the tenant. So the short answer is yes. It does not have to be an upfront cost, though. Generally, landlords look at those costs and amortize it over the full lease term. They will eat some of the cost increases, but they also have built-in margin in their pro forma, so they'll be all right.
A lot of margin in New York real estate, right? You touched on earlier that you've done some multi-market outside of New York work with occupiers not focused or have their additional offices outside of New York. Is there anything New York specific that, other than the sheer size of who we are in this market, that sticks out in negotiating a New York deal versus somewhere else?
Oh, man. Security deposits, bane of my existence. So for those listening, if you're in New York, you don't think there's anything wrong with a 6 to 12 month security deposit. You go to pretty much anywhere else in the country, especially when you get to the tier 2 and tier 3 cities, like you're talking about a few months of security deposit. And so when I have clients who aren't based in New York, San Francisco, Chicago, DC, sorry, Texas, I'm thinking of you too. It's a challenge to educate the clients that they should be expecting a pretty significant knock on their security deposit. So that's one significant way that there's quantitative difference. There's also a negotiation qualitative difference, and that will vary by region. And it doesn't mean that if you're someone from the Deep South with the drawl that you're any less aggressive. It just means that the style and the culture of negotiating is different. And so the more you do, the more you pick up on certain things. New York tends to be very upfront. And in the South, for instance, they really want to get to know your family. They want to understand who you are. And so sometimes you take 15, 20 minutes before you get into business. So it's been a fun ride. There are differences in both directions. No value, though, other than New York being the best.
New York's the best? Why?
Why is New York the best? It's the most unique place in the world. It is literally, obviously, an island. You can only build up. You have insane diversity. I think, what is it? You have people in the New York metro area from over 190 countries.
I know there are over 200 languages spoken in Queens.
And that's Queens. Like that's crazy. You add in Brooklyn and other parts of the Bronx. I mean, it probably goes up from 200. But it's really the compromise city, because you could live out in Long Island, Westchester, New Jersey, or in New York City or Brooklyn, and Manhattan is the focal point. That's where everybody gathers. And you have such deep culture, you have such deep labor pool, you have diversity of tenant roster, you have places of higher ed. You have, and we have our problems too. A lot of it, I think, is inflated, particularly the crime issue. There's more headlines about crime than actual crime. Historically, it's pretty much in line with everything that we've seen, which means that New York, as a Tier 1 city, is the safest large city in the entire world, other than Tokyo.
One of the few things I agreed with de Blasio about.
Yeah, and so... Yeah, well, he should be. He should have been promoting the heck out of the city, and I'm glad that he was. But, you know, New York is just an endless level of surprise, and I've grown up here. You know, my first car was at 35 years old after I'd moved out to the suburbs. That's how New York I am, and in a lot of ways, I don't appreciate the energy of the city. I married a girl from Cincinnati, and she helped me appreciate the city. You know, I didn't notice that I was taking subway rides with my head buried in someone's armpit. She helped me understand that. And so, you know, it's always entertaining. It's always fun. But it comes down to the people.
So you touched on some of that. You know, New York is home for you. You know, one of my favorite parts about brokerage business is that many of us come from a swath of different backgrounds. You know, I'm a city kid, born and raised in Brooklyn. My parents born and raised in Brooklyn. You know, grandparents born and raised in Brooklyn.
You can't tell by your accent.
No, not at all. I could put it on even thicker if you want me to.
Lay it on, baby.
But, you know, there are people come from all over. Can you touch on a little bit about your background and how it led to Bear Stearns / Studley?
You want the quick bio?
Go for it.
All right. So born in the city. When I was young, my parents moved out to New Jersey. But I commuted into the city for school. I went to school on the Upper East Side. And I took a gap year between high school and college. I went to Israel. I studied in an all-male yeshiva. My classmates were all studying to be rabbis. Curriculum was mostly in Hebrew. I was away from my parents. And it was the most meaningful year of my life because we're not graded on it. And so it was the first time in my life where I was doing something for myself. And so I spent the whole year studying these ancient texts in Hebrew and Aramaic, and it was an amazing experience. And then I came to NYU when I finished up that year, and NYU was a walk in the park. I couldn't believe how little time I had to spend in school after this intense previous year. When I was at NYU, my best and brightest friends all wanted to go into investment banking. That's what I wanted to do. That's the Bear Stearns connection. And then I ended up at Studley, which is now Savills. I never really understood anything about brokerage, even when I was an intern there. I just kind of held on and knew that the people who worked around me were bright and passionate about what they did, and I knew that I wanted to tap into that.
Yeah, I love it too.
It's addicting.
Part of what makes it addicting is the roller coaster of this business, right? The highs are really high, the lows are really low. I mean, you started out in 08, 09, nobody was signing leases. Companies were folding left and right. You know, are there any particular memories or notable transactions that really brought you back up after a big pitfall or something that you want to share with us?
Yeah, there are a bunch of them. I think the key, and I try to master this, it's a work in progress, but when something good or bad is happening, I try to hit pause, remove myself from the situation, and be objective about how these things are happening, and a lot of it is not related to the other things that are happening at the same time. Meaning, if you're getting a spate of bad luck, it's going to change. If you're getting a spate of good luck, recognize that that might change and enjoy it while it's happening. The most meaningful deal, I think, of my career, it's probably changed at this point, but this was my answer for a long time, was a tech company, publicly traded, not at the time, who I actually I met the decision maker at a buddy's wedding party. She was dating my friend at the time. So we actually met in a hot tub, which is a funny story.
There you go.
I didn't want to bury that lead though. And so I ended up doing a 2,000 square foot deal for them that then within a year turned into 12 and then 24,000 feet. And then 2 years later, we signed a 50,000 foot deal and then exercised an expansion for 60,000 feet. And I was 5 years into the business. And it was amazing. It was awesome. But then within several months of that deal closing, where we're talking about growing to over 100,000 feet, we were terminated because they hired a new CFO who had other relationships. And so in a very, very brief period, I went from top of the world to the bottom of the world. And I've never forgotten how either of those two things feel. And so it's not that those experiences have gotten less. You kind of build up a resistance to it. You understand that you're in the wave. You might be coming up or you might be coming down, but it will continue to go up and down no matter what you do.
No doubt, no doubt. One of my early career mentors always stressed, celebrate the victory no matter how small. You call somebody you've been trying to chase down for months or years, and you finally book that meeting. Take a deep breath and smile. You call somebody for a couple of months, years, keep going, email, and then you finally says, we already hired the competitor. Accept it. It's not the end of your career, and keep going.
That's it. I had a really ugly situation once where I was representing a client who was the sub-landlord in this situation, went out, found them a replacement tenant. It was small business, very unsophisticated, and we got the deal done. We sent it over to the landlord for consent. In subleases, you need the landlord's consent. And the landlord did nothing with it, screwed it over. And this tenant was really unhappy with me and started emailing, for no reason, it was not my fault, started emailing our client, copying me and basically saying, you need to fire Gabe, et cetera, et cetera. It was very detailed and mean. It was mean-spirited. And it was another big learning experience where I had to learn how to tune out people who didn't matter. I had the last say, though. He emailed me a couple of years ago, actually, apologizing for his behavior. So all is good.
Did he hire you for the next deal?
I didn't respond to him. Yeah, we're gonna let that lay.
Not too bad. A pretty key differentiator we've touched on a little bit here between your career and your setup and mine is I do a lot of work with landlords on the landlord side. You do a lot of work on the occupier side. Do you think there are advantages to playing both sides of the fence, to being strictly that tenant guy? I mean, how do you work with that around your business every day?
Yeah, so thank you for the leading question. I do think that tenant-rep, right? So the historical argument for tenant-rep was no conflicts. Like, we'll never be in a position of conflicts because we only represent the tenant, and that is true to a degree, but that's not why someone should hire us. The value of a tenant-rep is they spend all of their time strategizing on solutions for the occupier. So every touch that they have with project management, with workplace strategy, with the research department, all of that is experienced through the lens of the occupier. And so you learn how to speak one language really well. And like anything else, if you're doing one thing over and over again, you get really good at it. Now, I have a lot of friends who do both, and they are very talented brokers. And so it's not to say that if you are a dual agent that you can't do a tenant rep deal or you can't be on a landlord agency. But I do think that there is an enormous value to having someone who essentially does one thing all the time. And you have those players at all the major firms as well. It's just not that common. Savills' whole business, of course, and all of their service lines support the occupier side of things.
Yeah, it's an interesting way, and thanks for giving me the inside scoop on your pitch book, because there are pieces.
Take your best shot.
Yeah, no, there are pieces that I like, and I know, especially early in my career, I felt really comfortable playing both sides of the fence. Never in the same transaction. New York is too big to occupy the same tenant in the same space. But to learn how the landlord thinks, to learn how he's trying to dispose of space, to learn where you can push, where you can pull those negotiating levers. And then when you get to the opportunity to represent the tenant in another building, could be the same landlord, could be across the street, could be completely downtown, you learn what the landlord's push points are and how you can effectively achieve the goal of occupancy in there. So that was key for my career.
No doubt. I completely agree. I think that certainly when you're starting out, and this is not to say it's not good when you're further in your career, but when you're starting out, you can learn faster on the landlord side. You learn about building systems. You do learn about how landlords think. You also acquire that knowledge on the tenant side through exposure, but it takes more exposure and longer because you're just spending less time in the building, spending less time talking to the landlord. It's why I think historically a lot of tenant-rep teams have hired new people on their teams who have spent a few years on agencies for that specific reason.
That's a good point. You talk about, starting careers. One thing that I know you do really well, we've been friends for a while, is you've been very influential with the broker training program over at Savills. Can you give us a little background of why you started that route and if and how it's helped the team, the company, yourself,
The industry. I think the industry is really important too. So my start with the junior broker program. So for those of you not familiar, Savills Junior Broker Development Program is a rotational program, 15 months long, and you rotate around the different practice groups within the company. So with a research foundation to start, you circulate around 3 different brokerage teams, and you touch on all of our major business lines. And so it's a very competitive program. It's across the country in several different cities. And we just started year 3 of this. And so the first class started September of 2020. So for a long time in that summer, we weren't sure if the program was going to start. To Savills' credit, not only did they maintain their commitment to the program, they actually expanded funding. And that was really exciting. But if we move the clock back even further, how did it all start? I interned at Savills. I started full-time at Savills. And I was very, very fortunate because I ended up working with 2 of the top brokers in the company by pure luck. I was hired by David Goldstein, who's now president of the Tri-State at Savills, and Greg Taubin, who's an extremely accomplished broker and one of the top producers at our firm. And that was pure luck. And what I did from there, of course, I'll take a little bit of credit. That also had a lot of luck to do with it. But where I started was all luck. And so when we started to think about the next generation, we wanted to address some structural issues that had to deal with, I think, why we maybe lost talent that otherwise, if they were mentored properly, would have been placed. And so the whole program is structured around giving very high-level mentorship, ensuring that people do not slip through the cracks, and then supporting them both from a professional development standpoint as well as a financial standpoint. There is compensation that's beyond just the traditional broker draw.
Oh, you mean starting from zero for the first 18 months?
Exactly, yeah. I've lived through it. I survived on the other side, but that doesn't mean others have to as well.
Yeah, I love what you guys have done with that. I've met some of those candidates, and I've noticed, especially of the New York cohort, each year they've become bigger, better, brighter. No offense to the guys who just started or were part of that first class, but has it really, your exposure with it, has that really upped the game, not just for Savills, for all of us as a whole?
I think so. I think that when you're new to the business, you bring a degree of energy and fresh eyes that's really helpful. And I think everybody benefits from it. It was really important to me that in the wake of the pandemic, we didn't stop focusing on the development of the next generation, the youngest in the business. And naturally, they get less attention because they're further down the pipeline from most management. It wasn't that long ago for me, and it was just really important that we remain committed to that. It's been really exciting to see some of our competitor firms dust off their programs. I'm not going to mention them by name, but it's been encouraging to see a lot of the programs that the junior broker program at Savills took inspiration from kick off the dust, and that commitment to the next generation, in spite of some economic headwinds, gives me a lot of excitement for all of us. I think we're on a trajectory towards a even greater professional industry, and the caliber of talent in terms of their intelligence and dedication to the business is way beyond anything I experienced when I was first starting.
I mean, the business itself is heading in that direction. It's no longer a group of sleazy salesmen, right? There is a real consultative, analytical approach that it takes to win business today. So I feel like...
And a solo broker, it's really hard for them to walk in and win. I mean, it demands teams and tapping different service lines. Most business today is beyond just one person.
I thought it was more about, I'm good at one thing, you're good at one thing, but I guess you put it all together, that's what makes the team in general, right?
That's right, yeah.
Switching topics one final time, one thing that I've noticed about you and your career and have been an inspiration for me and mine is the power and the presence of social media. You've been at the forefront in brokerage, commercial brokerage, kind of, taking aim at the Ryan Serhants of the world who are just everywhere out there with, their residential product. But can you touch on why you kind of started that? Has it helped? And, stuff like that.
I try to approach life with a philosophy of embracing failure. And, baseball players do it all the time, right? Yankees, go Yankees, great win last night. May they win tonight. It's you make it to the Hall of Fame if you're missing on 6 balls out of 10. And so you have to embrace failure, because if you have a mindset of embracing failure, you're going to take risks, and risks are how we advance. And social media was that for me. I took a lot of risks. I put a lot out there. I heard a lot of hate to my face, so you can only imagine the hate that was said not to my face in those early years. But I do think that I'm on the other side of that. But putting yourself out there was not comfortable at first. I got a lot of interesting comments, and even today, I'll give a call out. You have to be open to change. Over the summer, right, the 60 Seconds with Gabe, I used to start every episode by saying, hey guys, right? Hey guys, welcome back to 60 Seconds with Gabe. Got an email from a partner at a major law firm over the summer, and the email was calling me out on kind of being exclusionary by saying, hey guys. Now, on the one hand, it's a way of speaking that a lot of people use. On the other hand, if by one word change I could make someone feel a little bit better, then of course I will. So if you've noticed, I now say, hey all. And so, I'm still getting some inbound in a lot of ways. It never fully changes. But I continue to put myself out there and try to improve. We're all human. And it's been an amazing experience. There has been a linear correlation between my professional successes and my commitment and time spent on LinkedIn.
Do you think that was intended to be critique or critic?
It was. I know the gentleman. It was intended to be helpful. It was just a bit of an upset tone.
Noted. And while I do appreciate you telling that part of the story, right, I hope to learn from that mistake, and I'm prone to make it again. But I've noticed that when you first told me that, maybe I should reduce the "Hey guys, what's up, guys? How y'all doing?" type from my.
I'm guilty of it as well. It's you can commit yourself to trying to improve, but we have to accept that we're not always going to be perfect.
Now, you touched on how your LinkedIn exposure and presence has helped the business. Is it inbound referral sources? You're known as a voice in the industry. And, can you touch on some benefits that it specifically?
Yeah. So I think when you start out on social, it's important to think about your intended audiences. And so I think about my intended audiences as fitting into one of 3 baskets. Basket A is really all of my clients, right? So in many ways, it's a defensive move to stay in touch with my clients, and so I'm not forced to send them some market report once a quarter that's really impersonal. I'm just kind of always there through this buzz that surrounds them. So basket A are my clients. It's both defensive but also offensive, because if someone moves jobs, or there's been a few years since our last interaction, I'm top of mind for them. Basket number 2 is what I'll call brokers, and it's both within the firm and outside the firm. And a lot of that is inbound business, but a lot of that is inbound business because I've also worked with brokers in different markets, and it's just come back to me. And the third basket is what I call your latent network. So an example of that would be someone you went to elementary school with. You haven't spoken to this person in 20 years, but they suddenly find themselves in a position of influence. You reach out because you've been active on social. They remember you, they validate you, and they're happy to make the introduction or give you a shot at making the business. So I think about that in 3 different baskets. I've gotten business from all 3. The one thing that really never happens is when I get a call out of the blue from someone who I've never spoken to before, who says, "Hey, I want to hire you for my real estate project."
We can dream, right?
Yeah, we can dream. But people always ask, they default to that saying, "Well, did that happen?" No, that hasn't happened yet. But I don't want to get into details. But in both of those 3 baskets, there is a regular flow that has been accelerating as the years have gone by.
Hashtag goals.
Hashtag goals. Yeah, that's right.
Well, Gabe, before we wrap up, we want to finish with what we like to call here the New York Minute. Speed round, rapid fire, let them go. You ready?
Let's do it.
Favorite way to get around New York?
Walking.
Why?
It's like the best way to see the city. I'll walk anywhere as long as the walk is, call it, under half an hour. If it's over half an hour, if I'm going downtown from Midtown, I'll take the train. But if I'm going from Midtown to Herald Square, let's walk.
Love it. Favorite lunch spot?
Reliable Deli is probably my favorite spot. It's right around the corner. They make a mean tuna sandwich. It's like a hole-in-the-wall spot. It's exactly like my cup of tea. But if I'm trying to impress someone, Bobby Van's on 54th.
There you go. What about after work?
After work, St. Bart's during the summer, and Papillon in Midtown any other time of the year.
How you doing?
How you doing?
It's one interesting fact, not real estate related, we didn't touch on today.
Ooh, that's a good one. Never had a Big Mac. Never had a Big Mac.
Wowza. What is one thing that sparked your interest in the news this week?
I think the Goldman thing really got me thinking when they announced that they have 100% confidence, or they think a recession will settle in with 100% confidence. Not because they're 100% confident that a recession is going to hit, more so because how could you be 100% confident in anything? Like, that's ridiculous. It kind of made me question the underlying assumptions there.
If you can go back and tell your 18-year-old self one piece of advice, you just graduated high school, go.
We're gonna get heavy for a second. All right, you ready for this? So if I had to go back to where I was 18 years old, I would say spend more time with your loved ones, and there's a reason for this. My brother about 6 years ago passed away. He committed suicide, and if I went back when I was 18, I'm not talking about could anything have been done to change it. I don't think so. However, I would hold him closer because we only have so much time in our lives, and it's really meaningful time. I was with my parents, this past weekend. They're doing great. They're in great health. They're in their late 60s, I tried to appreciate every moment that I have with them, and I think that's a gift that you get as you get older. You start to appreciate the moments when time slows down.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, Gabe, thanks so much for the time today. I know I learned a lot. I took some notes here that I'm taking back home, and I really appreciate you for your mentorship and your advice, not just today, but in general over the years. So thank you, my friend.
You got it, man. I appreciate you having me on. It's always great to hang out with you. And again, this was fun talking. We'll continue this offline.
There we go. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers all.
There you go.